Picture a winter night, tens of thousands of years ago, somewhere in an ice-covered valley in Europe. The temperature is dropping fast, snow is falling, and the humans huddled together in that valley have no jackets, no blankets, no heated cabin to crawl into. Just skin. Bare skin, mostly. So how did they survive? How did a species with almost no fur, no thick hide, and no natural insulation manage to live through freezing winters that would knock most of us out in an hour? The answer is stranger, smarter, and more surprising than you'd expect. And it changes the way you think about something as simple as staying warm. Let's rewind a bit first, because this story doesn't start with snow. It starts with heat. Early humans evolved in Africa, in warm, open grasslands. Back then, staying cool was the real challenge, not staying warm. Our ancestors lost most of their body hair over time, and scientists believe this actually helped them sweat more efficiently and hunt during the hottest parts of the day, when predators preferred to rest in the shade. So here's the twist. The same bodies built for beating the heat eventually had to face the opposite problem completely. As early humans spread out of Africa and pushed into colder regions of Europe and Asia, they carried bodies that were, frankly, terribly equipped for winter. No thick fur, no blubber layer like a seal, no built-in defense against ice and wind. But here's where it gets strange. Despite all that, humans didn't just survive in cold climates. They thrived there, spreading across freezing landscapes that other, better adapted animals still struggled with. So what was the trick? The first big piece of the puzzle is fire. Just like fire transformed the way early humans ate, it also transformed the way they survived the cold. Archaeologists have found strong evidence of controlled fire use at sites in Europe dating back several 100,000 years, with widespread, well-established hearths appearing clearly by around 400,000 years ago. A fire at night did more than just cook food. It created a bubble of warmth in an otherwise brutal environment. Groups could huddle close, dry off wet clothing, and keep their body temperature from dropping into dangerous territory while they slept. But fire alone wasn't enough. You can't carry a campfire around on a hunting trip. You can't wrap a flame around your shoulders. For real, lasting protection from the cold, early humans needed something else entirely. They needed clothing. Now here's where things get genuinely fascinating, because scientists have found an incredibly clever way to figure out exactly when humans started wearing clothes. And the method has almost nothing to do with fabric or fur. It has to do with lice. Yes, lice. Stick with this one, because it's one of the strangest and smartest pieces of scientific detective work in the whole story of human evolution. Humans carry two main types of lice: head lice and body lice. Head lice live in hair. Body lice, on the other hand, live in clothing, and they can only survive by clinging to fabric or fur close to the skin. Here's the key insight. Body lice couldn't have existed until humans actually started wearing clothes regularly, because before that, there was no clothing for them to live in. By studying the genetic differences between head lice and body lice, and estimating how long ago these two groups split apart evolutionarily, scientists have been able to estimate roughly when humans began wearing clothing on a regular basis. Various genetic studies point to a window somewhere between about 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Think about that for a second. Tiny insects living on human bodies today are quietly holding a genetic record of a decision our ancestors made tens of thousands of years ago. Nature kept the receipt, and scientists figured out how to read it. But here's the next question. What were early humans actually wearing? Because we're not talking about zippers and thermal jackets here. The earliest clothing almost certainly wasn't sewn at all. It was simple. Animal hides draped over the shoulders, furs wrapped around the body, and tied with cords made from plant fibers or sinew. Functional, not fashionable, but incredibly effective at trapping body heat. Then, something changed the game entirely. Someone invented the needle. Archaeologists have discovered bone needles with tiny eye holes at sites dating back around 40,000 years, found in places like Siberia and other parts of Eurasia. These needles are small, precise, and clearly designed for one purpose: sewing. Once humans could sew, clothing stopped being just a draped covering and became something far more advanced. Fitted garments, layered clothing, clothes shaped to the body instead of hanging loosely off it. And this mattered enormously, especially in the coldest environments on Earth. Here's where things get even more interesting. Some of the most extreme cold weather survival in human history happened during the last ice age, when groups of humans pushed deep into Arctic Siberia, one of the harshest environments imaginable, with winter temperatures plunging far below freezing for months at a time. Excavations at sites like Sungir in Russia, dating back around 30,000 years, uncovered burials containing thousands of small ivory beads, arranged in patterns that archaeologists believe once decorated fitted clothing, things like hooded parkas, trousers, and boots. The fabric and hide have long since decayed, but the beads remained, tracing the outline of garments that would look surprisingly practical even by modern standards. In other words, tens of thousands of years ago, humans were already wearing something close to a hooded coat and pants combo, expertly designed for extreme cold. What's especially striking about the Sungir burials is the sheer amount of labor involved. Researchers estimate that each ivory bead took a significant amount of time to carve and drill by hand, and some of the burials contained thousands of them, sewn in careful rows along the outline of the clothing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It suggests that clothing had also become a symbol of status, identity, and perhaps even beauty, layered right on top of its practical purpose of keeping someone alive through a Siberian winter. That's a strange and rather beautiful thought. Long before fashion existed as a concept, humans were already turning survival gear into something decorative, something worth spending enormous time and effort to get just right. Here's something that makes this even more impressive. Sewing a hide isn't as simple as poking a hole and pulling a string through. Early humans had to first learn how to properly prepare animal skins so they wouldn't rot, crack, or stiffen into something useless. This process, often called hide tanning, likely involved scraping away fat and flesh, stretching the skin, and treating it with substances like animal brains, which contain natural fats and enzymes that help soften leather. Some traditional cultures around the world still use brain tanning methods passed down for generations, a technique that may stretch back much further than most people realize. Stone tools specifically shaped for scraping hides have been found at numerous prehistoric sites, some dating back well over 100,000 years, suggesting that hide preparation was already a serious, deliberate craft long before the invention of the needle came along and took things to the next level. Once you combine well-tanned hide with a sharp bone needle and sinew thread, you suddenly have the ingredients for something remarkably close to real tailoring. Not just a blanket thrown over the shoulders, but a garment shaped to fit an actual human body, with sleeves, hoods, and closures that trap warmth instead of letting it leak out. Now, here's a question worth pausing on. Why does any of this matter beyond just staying comfortable? Because clothing didn't just keep early humans alive. It may have completely changed where humans could live, hunt, and settle. Without effective cold weather clothing, humans would likely have been stuck in warmer regions, limited to climates their bodies could naturally handle. But once clothing entered the picture, an entirely new range of the planet opened up. Frozen tundras, icy mountain ranges, Arctic coastlines, places previously impossible for a nearly hairless primate suddenly became livable. Some researchers argue that this expansion into colder regions may have even played a role in the extinction of other early human species. Neanderthals, for example, lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years and were remarkably well adapted to cold climates in their own biology, with stockier builds and larger nasal cavities, suited for warming cold air. But here's the surprising part. Some studies suggest that Homo sapiens may have had more advanced, more tailored clothing than Neanderthals during certain overlapping periods, potentially giving early modern humans an edge in extreme environments, where every advantage counted. This is still debated among scientists, and it's far from a settled explanation for why Neanderthals eventually disappeared. But it's a genuinely fascinating possibility that something as simple as a well-made coat might have quietly shaped which human species got to keep existing. Some of the evidence for this comes from an unexpected place: the tools each group left behind. Sites associated with Neanderthals tend to show simpler scraping tools, mostly suited for producing thick, unshaped hide coverings. Sites associated with early Homo sapiens in similar cold regions show a wider variety of specialized tools, including fine awls and eyed needles, hinting at more advanced, closely fitted clothing. Tighter, better sealed clothing means less heat escaping, which in freezing conditions can matter enormously over the course of a long winter, potentially affecting hunting range, energy use, and overall survival odds. None of this proves clothing alone decided the fate of an entire species. Climate shifts, competition for resources, and population size likely all played a role too. But it's a reminder that something as ordinary as how tightly a coat fits around your wrists could, over thousands of years, ripple outward into something as enormous as which humans got to keep surviving on Earth. Let's talk about something else surprising. Because staying warm wasn't only about clothes and fire. It was also about shelter. Early humans in cold climates didn't just brave the open air, they built. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of ancient shelters, made from mammoth bones and tusks in parts of Ukraine and Russia, dating back over 15,000 years. With almost no trees available on the open, frozen steppe, early humans apparently used the materials available to them, and that meant massive bones, stacked and arranged into dome-shaped structures, likely covered with hides for insulation. Imagine that. A house built from the skeleton of the very animal you hunted for food, repurposed into a windbreak against a brutal winter. Fire, clothing, and shelter worked together like a survival triangle. Fire warmed the air directly. Clothing trapped body heat close to the skin. Shelter blocked wind and retained warmth overnight. Remove any one piece, and survival in extreme cold becomes far harder. Before we get to more fun facts, there's one more piece of this puzzle worth exploring. Because clothing and fire weren't the only tools at play. The human body itself made a few quiet adjustments too. While humans never developed thick fur again, some populations that lived in extreme cold for thousands of generations show subtle physical differences that may have helped them cope. Researchers studying populations in regions like Siberia and the Arctic have found variations in body shape, often shorter limbs relative to torso size, which reduces surface area and helps the body retain heat more effectively. This pattern, sometimes called Bergmann's and Allen's rules in biology, shows up across many cold-adapted animal species, and some evidence suggests it applied to certain human populations as well. There's also evidence of genetic adaptations tied to fat metabolism and body temperature regulation in some Arctic populations, such as certain Inuit groups, whose diets were extremely high in fat, from marine animals like seals and whales. Their bodies evolved specific genetic traits that helped process this fat efficiently, turning a high-fat diet from a liability into a source of steady, slow-burning warmth. So the full picture isn't just invention alone. It's invention layered on top of a body that was, in small but meaningful ways, also quietly adjusting itself over many thousands of years. Culture and biology working together, rather than one replacing the other. Now here's a fun fact that tends to surprise people. Some researchers believe that the invention of proper cold weather clothing may have also influenced human brainpower, in a roundabout way. Making fitted clothing isn't simple. It requires planning ahead, understanding how to cut and shape hides, predicting seasonal changes, and passing detailed technical knowledge from one generation to the next. Some anthropologists argue that this kind of complex, forward-thinking behavior reflects, and possibly helped reinforce, more advanced cognitive abilities in Homo sapiens. In other words, staying warm wasn't just a physical challenge. It may have quietly exercised the same kind of planning and problem-solving skills that helped humans succeed in almost every other area of life. Here's another fun fact. Some cultures that lived in extreme cold for thousands of years developed remarkably sophisticated layering systems, long before anyone had a word for thermal insulation. Traditional Arctic clothing, like that developed by Inuit communities, often used multiple layers of different animal furs, each chosen for specific properties, some for wind resistance, some for breathability, some for maximum warmth, stitched together with techniques refined over countless generations. And one more fact worth sitting with. Scientists studying ancient skeletons have found signs that early humans in extremely cold regions sometimes suffered from cold-related injuries, similar to frostbite, visible in certain bone abnormalities. Survival in the Ice Age wasn't guaranteed, even with fire, clothing, and shelter. It was a constant, careful battle against an unforgiving environment. So here's where all of this leaves us. A species that evolved to sweat under a blazing African sun somehow found a way to survive and eventually flourish in some of the coldest, harshest places on Earth. Not through biological adaptation alone, but through invention. Fire tamed and carried into the night, hides draped, then stitched, then tailored into something remarkably close to real winter clothing. Shelters built from whatever the land and the hunt provided. None of this happened because human bodies suddenly grew fur or thick blubber. It happened because human minds figured out how to build the protection that biology never gave them. It's strange to think that every warm coat, every heated room, every blanket pulled up on a cold night today traces back to decisions made by small groups of humans standing in the freezing dark, figuring out how to survive until morning. So here's something worth thinking about. If clothing and fire and shelter help decide which humans survived the Ice Age, what does that say about how much of human success has always depended not on what our bodies could do alone, but on what our minds could invent to make up for it?